One of the stories in the Bible that shows you how evil this God is and how evil Abraham is, and how most Christians are evil because they just nonchalantly gloss over the story concerning Hagar. So, like, what do you know about Hagar? Not a damn thing. That's the response that most people would actually say. The reason why is because most of the time when you grow up in Christianity, you don't really hear much about Hagar. You hear a little bit, and I'm going to cover that a little bit, but then you don't really get to look at this story from Hagar's perspective. And when you do look at it from her perspective, you see the evil of this God and of these people who wrote this story, the evil of Abraham and the evil of Christianity for not teaching this story properly. So, in order for you to understand who Hagar is, first we have to say, who is Abraham? So, Abraham and Sarai, that Abram and Sarai were married at the time. Now, Sarai is Abraham's half sister. But when Abraham and Sarai were escaping a drought from Canaan, they went to Egypt. During this time frame, Abram said that Sarah, you are so beautiful at 80 years old that when the Pharaoh and all the other men see you, that they're going to lust after you and they're going to want you and they're going to try to kill me in order to get you. So tell everybody you're my sister and don't tell them that you're my wife. So the Pharaoh, he then sees 80-year-old Sarai and think that she fine as wine, like new wine, old wine, and the sackcloth that been sitting there aging, getting perfect. And so he takes Sarai into his house, finding out that she is only Abram's sister. Gets her into the house, do a little shakalaka boom boom. But then all of a sudden the plague falls all over Pharaoh's house. And Pharaoh's like, what's going on? What's going on? And later he finds out that actually, which they don't say how, Abram and Sarai are actually married. And so this Pharaoh capitulates to the God of Yahweh and says, you brought this evil upon me. And then proceeds to give Abram back his wife Sarai, tell everybody, don't mess with him. Then gives him a whole bunch of cattle, gives him a whole bunch of money, and gives him a whole bunch of slaves, because that's what they did in the Bible. Slavery was A-OK. It is presumed that Hagar, the Egyptian slave, was one of those slaves that was given to him. And then there are certain circles that say that Hagar was one of the princesses of Pharaoh that was given to Abraham. But Hagar, nonetheless, was one of the Egyptian slaves that was given to Abram. And Abram and Sarai, they left with all their money, because that is how Abram got rich. Abram didn't get rich by his work or his labor or his smarts. He got rich by pimping his wife Sarai, 80-year-old. She must have been real fine. So now we have Abram and Sarai, and they are chilling back in Canaan, and they have a slave girl, Hagar. She becomes Sarai's handmaid. Abraham had been promised that he will have kids that will be greater than the seas, than the sands of the sea, more than the stars in the sky. But his 80-year-old wife was becoming impatient and didn't think that she would be able to get pregnant. She didn't have faith, is how they teach it, in this guy. So Sarah says, hey, Abraham, why don't you sleep with my slave, my handmaiden here, Hagar, so we can have that baby and I claim it as my own, as they did in the Jacob story. But so Abraham, being the manly man of righteousness that he was, said, no, I'm not sleeping with her. So I believe in the promise of God. Nope, that's not what he did. He slept with her. He got her pregnant. She bore Ishmael. Now, after bearing Ishmael, Hagar starts getting a little jealous, starts feeling some kind, I mean, not Hagar, but Sarai starts feeling some kind of way. She gets a little jealous. And then she goes to Abraham and says, I want you to kick that woman out into the desert. Abram, being the righteous man that he is, says, no, I'm not kicking this slave woman and my firstborn son out into the desert. That's not what he did. He capitulated once again to the whims of his wife, and he kicked them out into the desert. Gave him some food, gave him some water, and threw him out into the desert. Hagar goes out into the desert, and then some say angels, others say God, came, visited Hagar, and said, look, don't worry about it. Don't be that way. Your son is going to be a wild man. They always going to have an issue against the Israelites. But I want you to go back to your slave owners. Can you imagine somebody telling Harriet Tubman to go back to her slave owners? Go back to your slave owners and then just be good to them. It don't matter that they kick you out into the desert. Just be good, be all right. And so she goes back. Some reason they accept her back. But then Sarah, she gets pregnant. And that's when her name changes. She gets pregnant. She becomes Sarah. They have Isaac. Now, according to the story, during Isaac's some ceremony with Isaac, I think it's his circumcision, Ishmael is cracking little jokes. They just say mocking or playing with, but Sarah doesn't like it. But she doesn't like it because he's playing with anything like that. What Sarah actually says is that she doesn't want Ishmael, this slave wife, because in their time frame, if the husband has a baby with the slave wife, the slave, then she becomes a slave wife. But she says she doesn't want Ishmael to receive any of the inheritances that's promised by this God, because now all of a sudden she believes in the promise. And of course, this is after Abraham now pimped her out to Amalek, and they've gotten some more sheep and some more cattle and some more slaves and some more silver. So now she's pissed, and she tells Abraham, kick that woman and her son back out into the desert. And of course, Abraham says, no, Isaac is the promised child. He's going to get the birthright. He's going to get the inheritance. I do not need to kick my... No, that's not what he says. He says, okay, I'm a pab. I'm a punk ass bitch. So I'm going to go ahead and kick this woman and my son, who's probably about 9, 10 years old at this time frame, out into the desert. He's a good little hunter with the bow. I'm going to kick him out into the desert. But then they get out in the desert, and this time, according to the story, this guy comes and said, well, you know what? I'm going to make an oasis for you. And there with that oasis, you, a woman and a child, will be able to make money, trade. And from this, you get the 12 Arab kings, and you get Islam later on down the line. And that's where Islam comes from. But do you ever stop to think about how this looks from Hagar's position? You was chilling in Egypt. You might even been a slave in Egypt, or you was a princess. Some dude lies, tricks your father. You get sold into slavery. When you go into slavery with some foreigners, you get there, and then a woman forces you to have unwanted sex with her old ass husband, who about 90 something years old, with her old ass husband. You young and virile, vibrant, you know, your tatas are still perked up, but you're forced to have sex with this old decrepit man. Then after you have sex with the old decrepit man, you get pregnant. You might be happy about that, but then the next thing you know, his wife gets jealous. The old dried raisin of Sarah gets jealous and then kicks you out into the desert. While you're out in the desert, the God of those people come to you, and you don't necessarily have to believe in their God, but the God of those people or an angel tells you to go back to your cruel master and be a slave again. You got your freedom papers. You got freedom. And although you thought you was going to die, you're told to go back and be a good little slave. You go back. And after a few years, they have their promised child. You think that things are going to be okay. At least your son, he's going to be up there a little bit. He ain't the promised child, but he's going to be up there a little bit. But then these two raisins kick you back out into the desert again to die. What kind of God would tell someone to what kind of God would tell someone to go back and be a slave once you've gained your freedom? What kind of God will allow for somebody who lied about his wife and pimped his wife out to then receive you as a slave along with a whole bunch of other money and stuff? What kind of punk ass man will sit up there and just do the bidding of his wife when he's supposed to have faith in this God? Evidently, he didn't have enough faith in this God. It is all just made up stories, I know. But it just demonstrates how jacked up the mentality of the people who wrote this story are, how jacked up the mentality of the people in the story, the characters of the story, how jacked up this God is. The only good person in this story is Hagar and Ishmael. But it's a good thing that they're fictitious as well, because it doesn't really prove that Islam is real, but at least they are the real protagonists, where everyone else is an antagonist in this story. But what do you guys think? And always remember, you have to free yourself to be yourself, because your greatness is non-negotiable. You know about Hagar now?